Welcome to My Life in Boxing with me, Gareth, Davies, and him, Spencer the Omen Oliver. In this series, we will speak to ex-fighters, current fighters, promoters, trainers, and of course, masters of ceremony. And joining us today, Spencer, is one of the brilliant masters of ceremony, and you're gonna make it sing, baby. As I always say to you, before every big event, every show, we search for each other. Thomas Treiber, how are you?
I am fantastic, and it is just an honor for me to be here. I really appreciate this. Becoming a ring announcer, that was not on my radar at 10 years of age. Actually had the opportunity to train and become a professional wrestler when I was 19 years old, and what an honor it is to work with Michael Buffer. I've known Michael for over 20 years.
You've chosen different career paths. How does that manifest itself?
I just never wanted a real job. I've had a lot of ups and downs. There have certainly been some lean years where I thought about maybe pursuing another career. The only times I ever feel a little bit nervous or uneasy, if you will, is if I'm not prepared.
But there is something about the American accent.
When fight fans think of those big fights, they think of Las Vegas. They think of Michael Buffer, Jimmy Lennon. I think that's maybe why boxing fans got used to that American style.
Can you give us a sign-off?
And now, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans joining us worldwide, the time has arrived for My Life in Boxing.
You're one of boxing's most renowned voices. You have an incredible presence with your voice. You've been all over the world doing this, from the current events in Saudi Arabia to Las Vegas to Madison Square Garden, everywhere. How did it first come about in terms of you knowing about boxing? What's your first memory, Thomas, of boxing?
Well, my first memory of boxing was I was 10 years old, and my father took me to a boxing event in my hometown of Hammond, Indiana, which is just outside Chicago. And that was my first glimpse at the sport of boxing. And I was very thankful for that opportunity. My father actually passed away, sadly, not too long after that. And but as far as becoming a ring announcer, that was not on my radar at 10 years of age, that's for sure.
But what was that feeling when you saw boxing for the first time? Did you see the theatricality? Did you see the brutality? How did you perceive it?
I found it very exciting, just seeing a ring and the fighters coming to the ring and everything was just, I could tell it was definitely something, special.
Listen, you was only a very young age then. Did you ever think you was actually going to box yourself? You never went down that route, but is it something that you ever thought, that first time when you have those memories of those shows, a lot of kids think, yeah, that's me, I want to do that. Did you ever get that feeling?
Never did. Never had an interest in boxing at all. I had a friend of mine who him and his brother were both boxers. And that's about as far as it goes. And they're actually the ones that introduced me to a promoter to get my start ring announcing. But as far as lacing on the gloves, never had an interest in doing that. I like my nose too much.
I love it about you that we don't know this, that your father's side are Germanic.
Yes.
Your mother's side Mexican.
Yes.
This is where we start to get into it. La raza, they love boxing.
Yeah.
When you went to boxing with your father, was he trying to inculcate you with something? Talk to us about, you said he's recently passed, which we are very sorry about. Did you have a deep relationship with him in terms of sporting mores?
Absolutely. My dad loved sports. He actually passed away shortly after he took me to that boxing event in 1985. Wow. So, it was, very special for me to get to experience that with my father. Of course, he had no idea that his son would get involved in boxing. But yeah, my dad loved sports. We would always go to baseball games and basketball games. And, he was a big boxing fan. So I think it was in the blood.
You became a big fan of a particular sport. It wasn't American football. It wasn't basketball. It wasn't baseball. It wasn't MMA or boxing. But it was another sport. Tell us about it.
Well, professional wrestling to me I was always fascinated by it. When I was around 11, 12 years old, that's when the WWF was starting with WrestleMania and all the big pay-per-views. And I just was fascinated by professional wrestling. And I always dreamed of somehow getting involved with professional wrestling.
I mean, I'm intrigued by this now because, I mean, fascinating background into the wrestling. Firstly, how did you fall into that? Well, obviously, every kid, when we watched it, it was WWF, I think, when we were kids, wasn't it? It changed to WWE. Now,
correct.
At what sort of level was you competing at, Thomas? I mean, when we were all kids, we all wanted to do that. The Hulk Hogans, the Steve Austins. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I started ring announcing at 17. And when I started ring announcing at 17, I also started ring announcing pro wrestling. So I was ring announcing boxing and pro wrestling. So I developed a lot of connections in the professional wrestling business. So at 19, I competed in bodybuilding. And right after that competition, I was approached by one of the wrestlers to train and become a professional wrestler. So I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to actually try my hand at I think every kid dreamed of being around. I used to wrestle in my backyard, and in the house we'd put the mattress on the ground and fall on it and so forth. So actually had the opportunity to train and become a professional wrestler when I was 19 years old, and was very, very lucky. Only 6 months into wrestling, I was actually spotted by a WCW talent scout, and I started wrestling for World Championship Wrestling, which was the #2 company in professional wrestling at the time, WCW. And I was enhancement talent. I was brought in to lose. I never won a match, but I had an opportunity to wrestle some big, big names in wrestling.
Let's just backtrack a little bit, because we've almost jumped from Thomas Treiber's, this kid who's clearly athletic, is in love with pro wrestling, has got this interest in announcing. You've been to small hall shows. You start at 17. Let's go back to that first of all.
Sure.
You are announcing fights at 17.
I was still in high school.
Were you nervous? How did it come about? Was that voice there? Were you making it sing, baby? Tell us about getting into that first of all.
I was certainly very nervous. I remember my first show that I did. My heart was beating out of my chest. And, you just don't want to make any mistakes.
But
I made a lot of mistakes. But you learn from the mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the key things for anyone who's pursuing ring announcing is to learn from the mistakes. It's the only way you're going to improve. And you never stop learning. I'm still trying to improve. Every show I try to do better and better. So you never want to have that mentality of, hey, I don't need to learn anymore.
Did you fall in love with being part of the theatricality of it all straight away? Because, as you know, I get in the ring to interview. Spencer does as well. He's fought in the ring. You're part of that war and theatricality. You must have that natural showman in you as well. You must have recognized that.
I certainly liked performing in front of an audience. I was a ham in high school and in grade school. I did some plays and things like that. And I always enjoyed performing in front of an audience. So having that I had an interest in broadcasting and performing in front of an audience, I think it was a perfect marriage, if you will.
Yeah, listen, Tom, so I want to backtrack again a little bit there because we've not touched on this enough yet. You getting into the wrestling and the physique that you had on you then as a young man, how much work did you have to put in to get to there? We know what it takes to, build the body the way that it was, and you were some specimen.
Well, thank you. I wish I still had that body.
Listen, we all do, my friend. Don't worry, you're not on your own.
When I was about 14 years old, me and a friend of mine, he lived across the street from him, he and I just, we got a weightlifting set, and, we went into his bedroom and started lifting weights, and we just fell in love with weight training and bodybuilding. We joined a local gym, and I was very fortunate to work out at a gym where there was a lot of competitive bodybuilders and professional athletes. And, I was able to learn how to train properly, because when you start with weightlifting, it's very important to have good form and learn how to train the right way, and then learning about nutrition. Now, this is before we had the internet. You couldn't Google things. You couldn't go on YouTube and watch videos.
We just had Arnie. We had Arnie. We had Schwarzenegger, didn't we?
That's it.
He was the guy.
Yeah.
And he was the influence on America, wasn't he, at that time?
Well, the movie Pumping Iron.
Yep.
I watched that movie probably 1,000 times. I've got that movie memorized. So my friend Phil Sickhart is his name. He was my neighbor. Me and him just fell in love with training. And we both just had this goal of competing in bodybuilding at some point. And I wanted to do it before I turned 20 because, when you're a teenage bodybuilder, it's a little different than getting into the adult bodybuilding.
I mean, was it a craze at the time that you recall?
Well, for me in high school, I had no interest in playing organized sports.
Right.
Once I got into weightlifting, I was in the gym. We would train 3-4 days on, 1 day off. Once I turned 14, 15, and I fell in love with bodybuilding, that was it.
Sunbeds and iron.
Just hitting the weights.
It became huge, didn't it? Because it sort of filtered over into the UK as well. We were watching it, like you say, Arnie Schwarzenegger, and watching him on Muscle Beach with Lou, who was it?
Lou Ferrigno?
Yeah, Lou Ferrigno, yeah, who played the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, that just captured the imagination of the globe, really. It was huge at that time, wasn't it? So what it must have been like in the States must have been insane.
Well, and of course, Dorian Yates from Manchester. I mean, you know, one of the greatest Mr. Olympias, you know, in the history of bodybuilding. So, you know, I was a big fan of Dorian Yates. He was one of the first mass monsters, if you will. I mean, there was nobody that had that type of size and density like Dorian Yates at that time period.
Is there now you look back on it, is there ever a concern about the narcissism or the body beautiful or steroids and all those things that would have crept into that industry as well?
Absolutely. You know, and at that time and at that age, I really didn't even think about those kind of things. I just loved seeing my body change. I just wanted, you know, every day I was reading the magazines and just wanted to, you know, I just had this goal of getting on stage. I wasn't training to look big at a bar or even look big in a t-shirt. I literally just wanted to compete in bodybuilding. So I had a different mentality than perhaps, you know, some other people who start to bodybuild.
I mean, you built yourself into a beautiful size, as we've seen, but you go into this wrestling and you end up wrestling like Stone Cold Steve Austin. He wasn't called Stone Cold Steve Austin.
He was stunning Steve Austin.
Right.
When I wrestled him.
What an experience.
This was in World Championship Wrestling, WCW. We were, you know, live on television, and boy, you talk about being nervous. But I wrestled. He was in a tag team at the time called the Hollywood Blondes, and his tag team partner was Flying Brian Pillman. And I was enhancement talent. My name was Tommy Tana, and you know that's the name that WCW wanted me to use. And it was just a great opportunity for me to take my wrestling career to another level. And I also had the opportunity to wrestle Ravishing Rick Rude, who many people remember from his days in the WWF as well. So very thankful that for that period of time and to be able to wrestle at that level.
Well, more on you wrestling next,
yeah.
but also on winning pro bodybuilding competitions as well. I called you a pro bodybuilder, but you were actually an amateur. But
yeah,
you were taking it so seriously. That's why I called you a pro.
That's okay.
You were literally a pro. So you go into... We'll talk about the wrestling in a minute, but you in bodybuilding, what did you learn about yourself?
I think the number one thing I learned from that was discipline. Because, you know, being a bodybuilder is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, you know, type of sport.
Give us your diet. Give us your regimen. Give us your... I mean, did you allow yourself to see girls at the time? Was it just... Tell us the format.
Yeah, you know, because you're in the gym almost every day of the week. You know, like I said, I would train 3, maybe 4 days in a row before taking a day off, and you would break it up to where, you know, maybe it'd be chest and triceps the first day, the second day maybe back and biceps, and then, you know, legs, and you know, you break it up like that.
Triceps.
So yeah, and then of course, you know, with the nutrition, you got to eat a lot of protein. So there was a lot of eggs and chicken breast and fish and steak, and you know, then for my carbs, I'd have, you know, sweet potatoes, rice, things like that. So, you know, you have to be very disciplined.
Thomas, at what point did you decide to pursue it or to move on? At what point, where was that transition?
To move on into...
Yeah, because like you move on into wrestling because you're at that stage in your life and you go, where do we go with this? And what, you know, am I going to move on? Am I going to kick on and try and compete at the highest level? What point was that?
You know, the wrestling opportunity came my way right after my bodybuilding competition in 1992. I competed in the 1992 Teenage Mr. Illinois. I was very lucky to win the overall competition. I won the middleweight division, then I won the overall. And it was only right after that I got the opportunity to start training for professional wrestling. And it was at that time that my mindset went from competing in bodybuilding to trying my hand at professional wrestling. Now, I must say that I never quit ring announcing boxing, though. Even when I was a professional wrestler, I would wrestle on one weekend, and then next weekend I was ring announcing a boxing event. So I never stepped away from ring announcing at any time since I was 17.
So you wrestle, okay? Like, the footage of you is incredible wrestling. Your body, as we've mentioned, was extraordinary. You had the tan of a man who was on Miami Beach the whole time. It's Tommy Tanner was your name.
Yes, it was.
Presumably Tommy Tanner Treiber. You don't pursue that, but you, at the time, there's these names around, Ravishing
Rick Rude.
Ravishing Rick Rude. He's the Omen, of course.
Yeah.
What would you have called me, by the way?
I'm trying to think of a name, like, probably can't say them on this show, but I'm just thinking the Gadge, Gareth A. Davies. That's how he's known. Everyone knows him as the Gadge. You go, let's turn the A into the Angel, Gareth, because I'm the Omen, of course.
You are. You'll always
the
be
Angel versus the Omen. You know what I mean?
That world.
Gareth Angel Davies, and you can see him, and you can see him coming in with the leather, can't you? One of the Hell's Angels.
Yeah.
And we go. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Loving it.
Hell's Angels, the Omen. There you go. I've already done it. We've got this relationship.
Well, I've got to say, I mean, I kind of missed out with my age group on being a WWE fan or pro wrestling fan growing up, but I see the theatre in it now. I mean, it's amazing. And look at the boxers that have crossed into it. Floyd Mayweather,
Tyson Fury.
Tyson Fury recently. It's amazing. It's an amazing sport.
I mean,
Tyson Paul.
Look, I grew up watching like The Ultimate Warrior, The Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, and all that. And you look at those and the theatre, and how that captured us as young kids. Everyone wanted to do it. You had the young models, you had the little models, and it was huge, wasn't it?
Tyson Fury's used it, hasn't he?
Absolutely.
You can see he's adopted it. I remember Chael Sonnen in MMA adopting from his heroes. There's definitely things that boxing and true fight sports, have learned from wrestling.
Absolutely. I mean, in professional wrestling, they always have these elaborate ring entrances with music and special lighting and things like that. And I think, that boxing has inherited, that to the sport. And perhaps some of that came from, watching professional wrestling, on how the fans really enjoy that element of a sporting event.
Exactly. Let's talk about your career now in the ring as a voice of boxing, as one of the big voices of boxing. What was your first opportunity to move into the big time? You've done it for several years, presumably. Tell us about that, and then moving into the big time.
Well, in 1991 is when I made my ring announcing debut at 17 years of age. After my wrestling career, I decided to go full-time with ring announcing in 1994. And it was in 1995 I made my debut on ESPN, and that was my first taste at being on national television. And that's where my perception of ring announcing changed, because that's when I started to realize, there could be an opportunity here to do this as a career. And, being in my early 20s now, I was looking for something, to make a substantial living at. And, so that was 1995. I made my debut on ESPN. And then it was in 97, I ended up getting a contract with Fox Sports Net and a company at the time called America Presents that was headed by Dan Goosen, great promoter out of California. And it was then that I became a full-time ring announcer in 1997 with that Fox Sports Net series. And I decided this is it. This is what I want to do. I
mean, 21 years that you've done that. And, going right back to the 90s when boxing, you had all the big names and great fights that were surrounding that. And you would have been involved in all of those. What was that moment like, starting your career there, where it was such a thriving time?
Yeah, I wasn't, I was a boxing fan, but I didn't truly follow the sport real closely. So there were certain fighters and people I was meeting that I remember meeting Roy Jones Jr. and I at that time I wasn't a huge fan. They were like, "That's Roy Jones Jr." I'm like, "Oh, really? Okay." I didn't realize, and so, but as when you're around the sport, you become a fan of the sport, and especially when you get to know the fighters and you develop a friendship or some type of kinship, it always makes it more exciting to watch them fight when you have that one-on-one interaction with them. So I think that's one of great things about being a ring announcer and being around the sport is you get to interact with all the fighters.
There's no university degree, as far as I know, on ring announcing, yeah? When you were watching some of the others, slightly older men who were at it, obviously Jimmy Lennon Jr. and Michael Buffer spring to mind. Obviously Bruce Buffer's in the UFC as well. Did you pick up hints and pointers, first of all? Where were your mentors? How did you do voice coaching? How did you progress?
Well, I did go to broadcasting school, but absolutely, there was no courses in there about ring announcing. But public speaking is, learning how to write scripts, things of that nature came in very handy when I became to project your voice, use what you have. But absolutely, Michael Buffer, who now I have the honor of working so closely with on all the Riyadh season events. I mean, what an honor to get to work with him on these. And Jimmy Lennon Jr., both Hall of Fame ring announcers. Those were really the guys that I looked at them and said, okay, what are they doing? Because I need to do that.
And what is it? And what is that? What is that crucial thing?
Well, they're professionals. You memorize your lines, good pronunciation, good delivery. No matter what country a fighter might be from, Jimmy Lennon or Buffer, they nail it. And they pay attention to those fine details. And as a ring announcer, I think that's what separates guys from one level to another, is when you really, put that effort in to doing the best job you can.
Is it one of those jobs that people only notice when you make a mistake? And when when you don't make a mistake, it's just what you're meant to be doing?
Absolutely. I think that's just the way it is. And I mean, with social media today, I think everybody's always looking for, somebody to make a gaffe, somewhere. But you just do your best. You can't put too much pressure on yourself. You just do the very best you can, every opportunity you get. And, and I'll still do shows, some smaller shows back in the States, but I always give 150%. I've always had the mindset that there's somebody out there that's never seen you before. And you always want to, show them what you could do.
I want to get into your mindset there, because the career path that you've chosen when you go from bodybuilding into wrestling, into MCing, you go, the career path is it's not just a natural transition, a natural flow. You've chosen different career paths. How does that manifest itself? I
just never wanted a real job. I mean, that's really all it is.
I'm with you on that.
But it's all in showmanship as well.
It is. I just, I always, I just like, I think when you do something you love and something you enjoy, you never work a day in your life. We've all heard, that saying before. And it's absolutely true, because I absolutely love what I do. I'm thankful every day that I get to make a living doing this. And there's a lot of great announcers out there, especially in the UK. There's a lot of guys that do a great job. And, unfortunately, sometimes only a handful get to work at a certain level. So there's not a day that goes by that I'm not thankful, to make a living at this.
Are there still nerves, and are you swatting, as I call it, with your notes all the way up to being there for the event? Obviously, you're doing events all week, but the big night is in the ring when you make it sing.
People always ask me that. Do you get nervous or this or that? And, as in broadcasters yourselves, I mean, if you're prepared, the nerves aren't quite there. The only times I ever feel a little bit nervous or uneasy, if you will, is if I'm not prepared or there's something that I'm not certain of.
Missed a plane and you got there late, which does happen, all these things.
Absolutely. And, there's a lot of things like that the fans at home don't realize. Sometimes I'll get off a plane and within 2 hours I'm hosting a weigh-in or a press conference. So you're fighting jet lag. And you just do the best you can.
Listen, there's that old saying, isn't there? Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. That is key to success in everything that we do. If you're prepared, mentally, you go out there and you just deliver, because that's what you do. You feed off that whole pressure thing. The pressure, for me anyway, brings out the best in me, and I'm assuming it does that with you.
It's funny you say that, because sometimes when I'm not doing big shows, I'll find myself making a mistake where I think, wow, I probably wouldn't have made that mistake if I was in Riyadh. But again, like I said a moment ago, I really try to give 150% every time I step through those ropes in the tux.
We'll come to the current boxing sphere in a moment, but Down the years, you've worked with Top Rank, you've worked on all the American networks. So you've worked with Bob Arum, you've worked with Dan Goosen, the late, great Dan Goosen, Hall of Fame promoter. Tell us about working with some of those promoters and what it's meant to you.
Well, it's an honor to get to work for all these great Hall of Fame promoters. It's just been an absolute honor, and I feel very blessed. And, you know, I think as a ring announcer, one of the biggest honors is to work internationally. Whenever you have a promoter, because, you know, a lot of ring announcers will get a job because they live in that part of the country or maybe, you know, in a certain town. But when a promoter thinks enough of you to put you on an airplane and fly you across the Atlantic, you know, across the pond to do a show. My first show in the UK, 2008, Carl Froch versus John Pascal, Trent FM Arena. I was blown away at the incredible fans here in England. The hair, if you could see my arms right now, the hair is sticking up on my arms right now.
We're going to talk about that in the last section today because that's a big moment in your career and it's led to now. But Bob Arum, Dan Goosen, what is it about working around those guys that makes them special?
Well, they're workaholics. You know, they're very passionate about what they do. And I think when you're around people like that, it rubs off on you because you're going to step it up. And so, like you said a moment ago, that pressure, you know, sometimes brings out the best in you.
It makes you into a diamond, doesn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely. Because the thing is, I rub off on him and he rubs off on me. And we don't get on all the time, do we?
No, we always get on, but disagreements.
But we love having disagreements.
Yeah.
In your job, you just got to be smooth. You can't really have disagreements, can you? Because weirdly, your voice is so important, but people don't want to hear your opinions.
Well, you know, true. I mean, as a ring announcer, you're not really out there expressing your opinions.
You can't.
You know, you're really out there to make the boxers look like stars and inform the fans of, you know, where they're from, their hometowns, their records, and do it in an exciting way.
Sell them.
You know, try and bring an excitement to rattling off stats.
But there's different levels of ring announcing, right? You see them at the amateur shows, you see certain, but to get to where you've got to and what you're doing and working on these big Riyadh season cards and, you know, we go back to Showtime and all the other places that you had worked, ESPN, you don't get there unless you're top of your profession. There's layers to what you do. So maybe you underplaying it a little bit. What I'm saying is you talking about feeding off that pressure and being able to deliver at the highest level. You know, that's not an easy thing to do. And I've seen that over the years, right from amateur boxing through to top emceeing on a professional level. That's not easy.
Well, I think that's why experience is so important. Whenever other ring announcers or, other ring announcers are pursuing ring announcing or just starting, I always tell them, do every show you can. Get as much experience as you can because that's truly the only way you're going to hone your trade. And like I said earlier, I'm still learning every show as well. So experience is key for when you get that door open where you're going to work a big show, you know, you're able to walk through it.
I love hearing that because it's something that Spencer and I talk about all the time, that in this sport, you never stop learning. And when you hear someone say that, who's at the level that you are, you know that they'll only get better and better. That's why on Showtime, was it the Showbox series?
Showbox, the new generation.
Years?
I was
21 years?
Yes, I started on the 3rd episode of Showbox, the new generation that ran over 20 years on the Showtime network.
Tell us some of the names that you were...
How you got involved in it?
Well, I did this Fox series from 97 to around 2000. That was with Dan Goosen and America Presents. When that ended for me, I had about a year where I was kind of floating around and, you know, trying to find my next big opportunity as a ring announcer. And they started this series called Showbox, the New Generation. And it was really for the prospects, you know, the up and coming fighters, because they had Showtime Championship Boxing for the world title fights. But Showbox was a very unique series. And I was very thankful to appear on the 3rd ever episode of Showbox and appear on there every year for the entire run of the series, which lasted over 20 years. Now, I didn't do all of them, but I did the majority of Showboxes every year. You
must have loved that, and you must have also seen a top class fighters develop through that system. And I mean, give us some of the names that you've seen come through that system. I love that.
Well, Devin Haney, just saw him the other day. He's one of our Showbox fighters. Regis Prograis, he came through there. Clarissa Shields came through Showbox. I mean, I forget how many, but there's a list a mile long of fighters who fought on Showbox who became world champions. So Tyson Fury, York Hall in London, we did a Showbox.
Yeah.
That was the only Showbox I ever did outside of the United States, was here at York Hall. And who knew Tyson Fury?
The undercard of Cole Frotch, right? Tyson Fury's debut, I believe that was.
Absolutely. And if we backtrack to my first show in the UK, December of 2008, Tyson Fury was our opening TV fight.
Absolutely. Before we move on to the modern day and some of the biggest events that you've announced at over the last, I want to say, 12 years, you did a little skit. You did a little skit announcing one Madam Kardashian, Kim Kardashian, for an event, didn't you? Tell us all about it.
So I got a call one day that they were going to do a special episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And this was in late 2009. And this is when the Kardashians was massive. The viewership was incredible. And I thought, what do you mean, a special boxing episode? So it turned out that Kim, Bruce Jenner, and her brother, Rob Kardashian, they were going to box on this charity event. And they were going to film it for the show. So the whole show was going to be this boxing episode. And I was very lucky to be the ring announcer on that episode of The Kardashians.
Mate, I have it. That's where it is. That's where Gareth A. Davies fits into the boxing circle.
That's
Him
it.
and Bruce Jenner. I can see it right now. Ring walks, the gad, and Bruce Jenner.
You can't have a man against a woman.
That's true.
Okay.
And I tell you what, when he was a man, he was the greatest athlete in the world.
Absolutely.
That's another My Life in Boxing anyway. That's for another day.
Okay.
On that show, what happens in the?
Well, Kim did not win. Bruce actually won his fight, and Rob, I don't believe there was like a weird situation in his fight as well.
Did they take it seriously or not?
They really did, and the family was wonderful. They were so nice. I got to spend the whole day with all of them. They had a room for us where we were, fed, and it was a whole day of filming. It was in Commerce City, California, where we filmed the episode. It was a great experience. And, and again, that show was so popular at that time. So to be a ring announcer and appear on the #1 hit reality show was quite a surreal opportunity.
Okay, so away from the glitz and glamour of the Kardashians and Bruce Jenner, you've featured on many UK TV shows. You touched on it earlier. Your very first UK show was an enormous one, 2008, Nottingham. Tell us who it was and where it was.
What an incredible experience it was. It was Carl Froch versus John Pascal. Now, this was Carl's first world title fight.
WBC super middleweight title.
You are good, my friend.
I was there.
And an insane fight as well. Fight of the year, actually.
Great
It was an
fight.
amazing
incredible.
fight. They literally traded blows, taking turns for 12 rounds. Do you remember?
It was an unbelievable fight. The fans in Nottingham, I just remember them going crazy. And when I introduced Carl as, and now the WBC, man, the crowd just went crazy for him.
Do a little bit of it. Come on.
You're putting me on the spot.
He's putting you into character.
We'll save it for the end. We'll save it for the end of the show.
All right.
But that Nottingham Arena, Cole Frotch there,
8,000
Jean Pascal, what an incredible fight. I mean, I'm sure the capacity was oversold there as well. It was just insane. What did you make of it? Like the British culture, it's obviously different to the US culture. What was your first experience of that? Like the taste of that? What did you think?
Blown away. I was blown away. I remember when I flew in the morning of the weigh-in, and they basically took me straight from the airport to the weigh-in, and it was held in like a shopping center. And it was just, we could barely. Mick Hennessy was the promoter of this event, and I remember going in with Mick, and we could barely walk through the crowd. I'm like, wow, what did I get myself into? So it was just truly an incredible experience. What a great introduction to the UK, and now it's become a second home for me.
Do you find was there any culture shock, or do you find there's a difference between the culture of the UK and the US fans?
Absolutely. In the United States, of course, they've got baseball, football, basketball. there's other sports that kind of preside over boxing.
It's a crowded sports landscape, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. But don't get me wrong. There's a lot of great fight fans in the United States, and that's my home country, and it's always an honor, to get to do events there as well.
Are the Brits different, though?
Well, the culture's different, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, the culture's just like the noise levels are just on another level.
You can't touch the UK fans. I'm sorry. They're just, the energy they show, the enthusiasm that they show for the fights and the ring walks. I mean, Nathan Heaney, when he does his ring walk, the fans are just going, they love it. Yeah. They absolutely love it. So, that's probably one of my favorite things about working here.
And on that December night, 2008, was it a December night?
It was I think it was December 8th, 2008. Yep.
On that night, and I think there was a 3 million audience on ITV that night as well. And it was the last time that they were showing big fights. And Carl obviously fought 13 world title fights in a row. But on that card was a man called the Gypsy King. It was his very first pro fight. I remember Mick Hennessy saying, probably to both of us, watch this young kid. And you hear that a lot in boxing.
Yeah.
You got to announce him coming out for the first time. Talk to us about that, but also you've announced Tyson Fury many times now.
Many times. And, at that time, I knew he had a pretty good amateur record. I had done a little bit of, looking into, but I was very amazed at his size. I saw the potential there. But you know how it is in boxing. You never know if a guy's truly going to take it to that next level. And boy, did he take it to the next level. So I was very honored to do several of Tyson Fury's early fights. And even when he came back after his hiatus from boxing, I did his return fight as well. I believe that was in Manchester. So, a long history of doing Tyson Fury fights.
Obviously, you become known as Queensberry's, Frank Warren's company's announcer now. How did that come about? And that's several years now, and it's led you to all these amazing, huge events.
Well, what an honor, first of all, to work for Hall of Fame promoter Frank Warren, Queensberry, and his great staff. It was 2017, September of 2017, I got the call to do my first event for Queensberry, and they were early into their deal with BT Sport at the time. And they were really looking for one person to do their events. And right time, right place, I was available, the opportunity was there, and they made me an offer.
How did it come about? You were just free at the time, or Frank called you, or how did it manifest itself?
Yeah, Queensberry contacted me. Well, actually, Jimmy Lennon Jr.
There we go.
Contacted me and said, I think you need to get in touch with Queensberry Promotions. They asked him if he had my phone number.
Brilliant.
And my contact information. So Jimmy was the one that actually, put me in contact with Queensberry, and we negotiated a deal. And Jimmy helped me as well, because boy, when you're getting hired by Frank Warren, you're like, what do I ask, and how do you work out a deal with Frank Warren? So, what an incredible guy Jimmy Lennon Jr. was to help me, give me the insight I needed to work out my deal.
I think that was at a time when we had a transition in boxing, when boxing was going, I think it reinvented himself in so many ways. It was becoming bigger. It was becoming a mainstream sport. And I think the American voice was what it was, that whole, showmanship and whatever. And you was doing your thing, and, people would recognise how you were developing as an MC. And it was sort of like a natural progression to sort of go, yeah, this is the guy, this is the one. And it seems that Frank Warren actually got that right, because you're doing what you're doing right now.
Well, almost 8 years now with Queensberry, and what an honor it's been, from arenas to stadiums to now working on a regular basis in Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, working the biggest events in boxing. It's really a dream come true for me to be, working right now with these events.
I think there's if the Italian language works well in opera, if the French language works well in diplomacy, if the English language works well with poetry, the American accent, I think, is very special in announcing because of the timbre of the voice. And I think that does bring a special thing. There's a reason why Big Mo, David Diamante, Jimmy Lennon Jr.,
Michael Buffer,
and yourself. Have you ever thought about that the American accent projects more in that resonance and glamour and theatricality of being an MC?
Well, I'm a big fan of a lot of UK announcers. There's a lot of really good ring announcers. There's a Craig Stevens, there's Ricky Wright. I mean, these guys do a great job.
But the voice is different. I'm being biased here, they is something about the American accent.
Well, I think, when fight fans think of those big fights, they think of Las Vegas. They think of Michael Buffer, Jimmy Lennon. I think that's maybe why boxing fans got used to that American style, because the big fights have mostly been in the United States.
Question I want to ask you. Now, you've worked at all levels in boxing, and you've now done Riyadh season as well. It doesn't get any bigger than that.
The
biggest
Riyadh
shows.
Season.
Absolutely, yeah, but I'm saying you've worked at all levels in boxing. I want to ask you about your emotions, about the nerves that are inside you going into that, because as a boxer, and I just want to try and relate this as a boxer, when you're a boxer and you're going through it and you're starting out against a journeyman type fight as you're going through, and your nerve levels are sort of high, but when you start topping the bills, the pressure becomes higher. Is it the same for you, like, when you're doing the emceeing? Smaller shows, bigger shows, is it a different pressure?
Absolutely. And, especially with these Riyadh season shows, because the world is watching. And not only is it the event on Saturday, but there's fight week with these Riyadh season events. We've got the grand arrivals on Tuesday. We've got the media public workout on Wednesday, the press conference Thursday, the weigh-in. So it's a full week where you've got to be on top of your game.
Oh, we know. It's a very, very long week.
It really is.
Look, let's go back to that very first Battle of the Baddest, Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou.
Yeah.
The very first Riyadh season, you're doing it. I think you shared it with Michael Buffer.
Yes.
Two things. What was your feeling about us moving to Saudi Arabia to do it, first of all? And what was it like working with the great Buffer?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, what an honor it is to work with Michael Buffer. We're great friends now. I've known Michael for over 20 years, but when I would do undercards for him on HBO shows, I would do the first 2 fights, and then he would come in and we'd have, just a little interaction ringside. But these Riyadh season events, we're together almost a full week. And, we'll ride together to and from the venues. And, we've had an opportunity to have that unique one-on-one time.
And pick his brain?
And pick his brain. And, most ring announcers don't get a chance to spend too much time together, because if you're doing an event, the other ring announcer is not going to be there.
So you're doubling up is unusual.
It's a very unique situation. Yeah. So, and Michael's given me some pointers that, hey, who else to learn from than Michael Buffer? So, what an honor.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You only learn from the best, and to be around those sort of people. It's like, similar to us in our game. You have your mentors and the guys that you look up to and inspire to be. And that must be it. I mean, Michael Buffer.
What are the things that he's really taught you? We talked about Jimmy Lennon Jr. What about the things that Michael's taught you?
Michael will watch when I'm doing my portion of the show from his dressing room. And, sometimes he'll make a point of maybe how I'm holding the microphone to, lower. I had a bad habit. When you're a ring announcer.
Tell us your bad habit.
Okay, so when you work as a ring announcer, a lot of times the microphone is not very good.
Right.
So you get in a habit of really putting that mic close to your mouth. You really feel like you gotta, speak very closely to it. But when you're working these incredible productions like these Riyadh season events, you're working with the best sound system possible. So you really don't need to do that. So, one of the things he had told me one time is, just lower the mic a bit. You don't need to be so close with it. So there's little things, like that he's pointed out to me.
And the small things make a huge change at that stage of your career. The foundations are built, really, aren't they? And it's like the minor things make a big difference.
Absolutely. And, like I said, I'm always looking to improve. I'm always trying to better myself. So very thankful to be working with Michael Buffer.
So what are we looking at next? I mean, I presume you're going to be there on February the 22nd for the big show, probably the greatest card ever. Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol rematch. Daniel Dubois against Joseph Parker for the IBF heavyweight crown. Agit Kabayel and Zhilei Zhang. Need I go on? You're here in London at the moment because you're involved in pronouncing and press conferences and all kinds of things around Ring Magazine Awards. Do you look forward every time now to going to Riyadh season? Because you have to make it sing every day, as you said.
Absolutely. I get, as time gets closer and closer to the events, I'm just counting the days until we're back in Riyadh, because there's such exciting events to be part of. And like you said, this event on February 22nd, one of the, if not the greatest fight cards in history. And it's certainly going to be a pinch me type moment to be a small part of that event.
Listen, I think it's fair to say we're all addicted to the sport of boxing, and that this Riyadh season stuff now has taken it to another level.
3 more things very quickly. What would a 10-year-old Thomas Treiber have thought about Thomas Treiber at 51?
Holy cow! What would I have told myself?
What would a 10-year-old Thomas Treiber, would he have projected that you'd have done this? Done all these things, been around the world, achieved all these things, wrestling, bodybuilding, announcing, still going strong, growing around the greatest and becoming one of the greatest?
I just take day by day, one opportunity at a time, and I just try my best every opportunity I get. Being involved in the things I've been involved with, there's no set plan. There's no, like we graduate college, you get a headhunter or a job hunter, and in our sport, it doesn't work that way. So, but I think that's one of the things that's always, interested me in being involved, is the uncertainty sometimes. But just to be patient, because, things don't happen overnight sometimes, and you just got to be patient and believe in yourself and never give up, because I've had a lot of ups and downs. Even though I've had above average opportunities, there have certainly been some lean years where I thought about maybe pursuing another career, but I just couldn't do it because I love what I do so much that I just couldn't quit.
Okay, finally, it would be remiss of me, Thomas Treiber, My Life in Boxing, with Gareth Davies and Spencer Oliver. Can you give us a sign-off as how you would announce it?
And now, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans joining us worldwide, the time has arrived for My Life in Boxing with Spencer Oliver and Gareth Davies.
Well, there you go, Thomas. Thank you so much. You're absolutely brilliant. It brings the hairs on your neck because it is pronouncing the fights, of course. Thomas, thank you so much for sharing your life in boxing. Absolutely fascinating. You've been watching My Life in Boxing, and this one was, of course, with Thomas, with me, Gareth Davies, and him, Spencer Oliver. We will see you next time.